Good afternoon to you. My name is Sifiso Mahlangu. This is ripped from the headlines, a continental show that looks at the leading news in South Africa and in the continent. This week, of course, we're looking at the Star newspaper and a headline stemmed by Mr. Adil Nchabeleng's taking the banks to the Equality Court. The story was written by Mr. Ayanda Mdluli, and we want to ventilate that story further this afternoon. The story went number one on the Twitter trail, viral in South Africa, with the hashtag racist banks must fall. And Mr. Mdluli explored how bank racism happens. Adil Nchabeleng was quoted as saying the banks are using apartheid-style mechanisms in South Africa. So for 3 days it was sitting at Twitter number one, racist banks must fall. So I have an elite group here, some academicians to talk to me about this banking. Are banks prejudiced to black people? Last week, the public protector responded to the story and said, banks do not support black people in this country, even in these times, meaning within the coronavirus pandemic. Look how I was treated when I investigated the ABSA bailout. I don't think banks are supportive to black people. That was Advocate Busisiwe Mkhwebane. Judge Jeremiah Hlongwe, who's the chairperson of the electoral court, says a change in the banks lies in the change of the constitution. It is the constitution of the Republic of South Africa that allows these banks so much power. Talking back to that point, the ANC Women's League was up in arms also last week after that story saying black people, and mostly women, are affected by the banks. Even after the Reserve Bank gave the banks of South Africa 400 billion rand, to be precise, the banks still don't support. Black people are losing jobs, they're losing houses, they're losing cars. There is no support. So a story that's gone viral, we begin to ventilate that right now. Follow me on social media. Drop us your comments. My name is Sifiso Mahlangu. Let's ventilate this story. I have a guest, Dr. Sihle Sibiya. Dr. Sihle Sibiya holds a PhD in information technology. He wrote the government paper on can IT be used in banking, and can it assist in transformation, making banking accessible to the majority who are in the villages and who don't have access to transportation or internet and Wi-Fi and things like that. He's my guest. Professor Boitumelo Senokwane, professor from the University of South Africa. We're talking banks. And Mr. Adil Nchabeleng. Mr. Nchabeleng is with Transform RSA as the president. And we ventilate all those voices right now. Don't touch that dial, ripped from the headlines. Dr. Sibiya, welcome to the show.
No, greetings to you, Mr. Mahlangu, and greetings to the viewers at home.
Yeah, so you wrote a paper on how IT can assist banks in transformation and furthering the transformation agenda. I want to talk to you about what inspired that, and do you think that banks are not running the transformation agenda? What are those reasons?
Probably, I think it will be great to start by just saying the issue of Africans being included in this country is a holistic problem. So being a holistic problem, then it requires a holistic solutions towards that. So addressing the issue of banks, it needs to also cover the other things. But I want to come to the fact that when you look at the banks, the current systems that we are using as a country in general, we are still using the colonial systems. Our government is still following the old colonial system. The banks, they are still in the middle of what is happening in this country. The oppression of mainly the black people is
yes. The banks are at the center of an economic colonial system.
Yes. So if you look at who owns the banks, that's the first thing. Because if you want to really transform this economy, then you need to look at who manage the money and so forth. But also we need to look at that, because if we were to look into the details that comes with that, those people, they have got access into the whole South Africans as to how much they earn, and when they get that money and what they use with that money, so that then they channel the markets accordingly, so that black people, you find that they're out of the market. But also you'll go to even the how black people have been moved from the society in particular. You'll find that the so-called middle class today, they have moved from the citizens, and they've positioned it somewhere in the so-called gated communities, and from there they've built the shopping malls and everything around there. Then where is the money going? And so forth. So they have made sure that they have captured the money is able to be channeled back to the same system and so forth. But coming back to the issue of the systems and the paper in particular, there is still a lot that still needs to be done in ensuring that we are enabling black, especially young and the youth and the women in this country, to take part in this kind of debates, but also to be the owner of, for example, a bank. We have got now 26 years in this democracy, but we have not seen a bank that is owned by Africans. We have got what we call a post bank. It has been in existence for some time, but because
do we exclude VBS from that list?
The VBS is part of was owned by government. We have got also in KZN, what they call it Tala, is also owned by. But you find that these banks, they have not been able to get the political support or leadership support to ensure that is able to address address the issues that pertains, especially the black community and so forth. So if you look at, for example, the Post Bank, why was it that it was just recently that they started to distribute the social grants?
Yeah.
Why was it was not from initially? Why don't we today have government employees and everyone else banking with Post Bank? Because it's a government bank.
Yeah. 2 years ago, the then Minister of Social Development, Ms. Bathabile Dlamini, told me in an interview that she was not finding support from then Finance Minister, Mr. Pravin Gordhan, and said it was almost as if Mr. Gordhan, in her words, wanted the social grants to be paid by the banks. Of course, in this country, the social grant beneficiaries are 17 million individuals. That's a lot of money.
Yes.
So you're saying there's no political will. From an academic point of view, Prof, where are we struggling?
Look, I think just to add on what my brother Sifiso is saying, it's very important. Obviously, one element or component will be of ownership, but we must at least go a little bit step further by asking regulations, the rules that governs banking, because you can still be an owner, you can have entitlement to ownership, but it goes further than that, because an owner is guided by the same rules that are provided by the system or legislation. Even if you can be an owner, 100% shareholder, you can still drive the same type of approach or agenda. It's more like in the American argument where people believe that Barack Obama will make a difference as a black president, yet forgetting that the rules and regulations, at least political agenda of the USA, will determine the outlook of how American politics should be driven. So I'm saying, even in this regard, we must go further than that. Ask what is the role of legislation in this whole particular scenario. Especially if one comes into understanding the original etymology of what banking was supposed to be or ought to be. It's in an Italian word of banca or banco, that speaks about the table where role players sit together, do transaction, trade.
And where are the voters? Where are the people of Alexandra? Where are the millions of working class who are employed, who are losing their jobs? What does cabinet say when we read every day that people are losing jobs? Are banks not coming to the party, or is cabinet not playing the role that it should?
I think the mistake that most of us, we're very happy to think that, for example, the ANC, when it came into power, we were excited that because of that political power, as much as one will argue that perhaps that was the opportunity to make rules. But the reality was that it kicks in what Sihle is talking about, the issue of ownership, the balance between making legislation or rules and also the practical component of administration of the economy itself, which banking becomes a mechanism or foundation of the transaction that takes place to facilitate the economy. So I'm just saying it's very important to make a balance between economy and politics all the time, because failure to want to believe, to emphasize economy, forgetting that politics are needed, or only to emphasize economy at the expense of politics, then one divorces that naturally, and eventually there is a consequence for divorcing the two.
So, Mr. Nchabeleng, you're taking the banks to the Equality Court, and many organizations are joining you. Dr. Sihle Sibiya-Insiga is joining you. The Right to Justice, led by Siphesihle Jele, will be joining us after the break. Mr. Jele used to work, of course, for FNB, and I know that, Adil, you come from an investment banking background. Where did things go wrong? And maybe to take it further, what needs to be done? I think we ventilated the challenges that exist in society so far as black people are concerned. For white people, there are picket fences, you know. There are trust funds. We didn't have trust funds. My parents took the pension to take me to school, and that was it. I didn't have a deposit and a first car as a gift when I was 18, and so on and so forth. We didn't have those advantages. From where we are now, what needs to be done?
Thank you for the opportunity. The current scenario, the reason why we are arguing the issue of banks with regards to discriminatory and racist banking practices is banks have been given a monopoly over the circulation of money in our state and economy. Through that circulation of money, they create money. They are able to make sure that people create businesses, which means they have a printing license for creation of value. That money needs to go into the economy. The minute a bank issues out a loan, that loan is actually given to an individual to go and procure a particular set of valuable goods or services, commodities, assets, whatever it is in the economy. That money now starts moving and rotating, which means it creates a positive. People get to earn incomes, people get to actually be able to use that money to be able to do the second transaction. What we are arguing is, in South Africa over the last 26 years, the money creation system has been concentrated only in the hands of the few, using banking system as a means by which to create a discriminatory economy which excludes black people in the majority. We have no access to credit because the banks are withholding credit capability when they are given a mandate by license, by us as the state, as the people. They take that license and only give preferable lending and loaning and issuing out of money to their companies that they are preferring, to the industry and sectors that they know the shareholders of the banks themselves are running. They are giving it to only a few black elites, 5+ or so, whom we know. And they are not letting that income rotate through the whole economy. So when you apply for a loan to a bank, you want to finance a coal mining company. The banks have taken a moratorium today over the last 6 months to say they are not going to be financing any coal transaction, even if it means coal mining. How many black people are sitting with coal licenses where they want to create brand new businesses in the coal sector? And banks have taken all a roundtable moratorium to say no more coal funding in the economy, which means that black person with that business opportunity and bankable opportunity is not going to be financed, is not going to get the opportunity. That is racism, because the majority of the licenses we know in the coal sector are now held by black people that needs to get into the economy and create an economic value.
But
you then take them out of it.
Are you saying banks have too much power? Is that your argument? Banks have too much power in the country, in society?
We are lacking leadership as Africans. People that have got the interests of blacks at heart. Because you'll find that you have what they call the Reserve Bank that's supposed to look after the interest of the black people or the majority in this country. But the same Reserve Bank is not owned by South Africans. So how do you then expect the interest of the majority in this country to be taken care? So that is a challenge. But also, as Ntabeleng was saying, is that we're starting to see banks becoming the gatekeepers today and directing how this economy needs to look like, because now they are in the forefront in channeling and making sure that...
So the banks decide when to close your accounts, when to open, how much to grant, who to fund and who not to fund.
Yes,
so
yes.
Of course there's some politics there. Professor Snukwan, is there a leaning, do you think, that banks take? We have specifically coming up who used to work for FNB, and this is my question to him. Is there a leaning by banks to particular individuals, particular organizations, particular political parties? I also want to make this disclaimer to all my viewers this afternoon that I did invite Capitec, FNB, Standard Bank and ABSA to this conversation. I also extended the invitation to participate on this panel by the Reserve Bank. They did not respond to this invitation, so the conversation must continue. Is there vested interest? Can banks say, well, we don't like this, the stance of this individual? Because then we're on dangerous ground at this. Because then they can see you commenting like this on this interview and be like, Kimang Adil, let's find him. What's his ID number? Let's block his account. Are we not on dangerous ground, Prof?
Look, I think first and foremost, we must all agree that the bank as a system, it matters not whether you challenge them or not, as long as you know how to play the game. I think that's where it boils down to that. If you know that, for an example, this is the criteria that banks are using to lend you, and you master that art, obviously they will do nothing against you. I'm not taking away the possibility that you can be targeted. That one I will not underestimate. But the reality is that if you master the system, you will always be safe. But even if you can master the system, it depends whether you've got access to certain privileges. For an example, to access mortgage, the issue of risk is calculated, and based on Russell 4, they individualize lending or credit. If you are a Sifiso, they'll individualize lending to you as Sifiso. And you will know that Sifiso might not be credit worthy, is risky in as far as lending is concerned. Then it indirectly or directly isolate you from participating in that particular economy.
Well, if you know how to play the system, but also, gentlemen, Ntabeleng, here's the argument. South Africa is considered the most unequal society in the world, the most unequal. And we've got what we call the triple challenges, poverty, unemployment, and inequality. So how many people in this South Africa have the ability to say, we will play the ball?
That's why I'm raising the individualization of lending or credit. For an example, whites historically, it is proven, it is there. They will be credited as individuals, but the reality is that the individual is located within a generation or generations. Whites already through generations have managed to accumulate certain assets. Call it
so
property.
Banks are racist.
So they are racist.
So banks are racist.
I think the issue of inequality kicks in because you can never start at the same footing with a white person, because they could have accumulated wealth through generation, and their risk level is far better than yours because you are starting at a negative. So that's why I'm saying that even if it becomes individualized, but we must locate it within the historical realities.
Yeah. I think you're taking the conversation even higher, that racism is not just a coloring method. Racism is not just texture, or melanin. It's in the policies that inform banking institutions. Adele.
Dr. Claude, speaks up very well about this issue. You know, issue of money and economy is what we call race. Is a group of people competing for a particular interest. So the group of elites who mainly are white and who mainly are foreign in South Africa, controlling our economy using the system that is currently available, is monopolizing the circulation, the issuing out of money through the banks. That's where the gatekeeping process happens. So if I'm going to make black people poor and poorer, where do I make sure that they never get access to coming out of the poverty? I use the banks, because government does not pay you except if it agrees with the bank to issue out the money to you. Government has instrument by which it borrows from their South African Reserve Bank. The money is then pumped into the economy through the banking system to make sure that the economy works. So the model itself right now, it's created along the boundaries of inequality. That is why you have till today over 80%, I'm actually even underestimating it, over 80% of black majority in poverty due to the inequality practices and racist practices that are currently being meted out on black people in the banking system, using the South African Reserve Bank, our own state reserve bank, using its license issuing process by making sure that black people do not get access to credit, to capital, to money, and you are not bankable. Not only that, coming back, Tokyo, let me say Japan, after the Hiroshima bomb was bombed to the ground, nobody had money, nobody had anything. It took Japan less than 20 years to rise out of its state of poverty, out of a decimated economy and everything. You know what they used? They used the banking system. They made rules that enforced giving money off to the people who are Tokians to make sure that they come out of the devastation of their economy and a country, and they ensured that they improved their quality of life through education, through infrastructure, through providing of services, through state apparatus, using what? The banking institution and system. Why is it that we come out of 100 over years of apartheid, right? We come out of 500 years of colonialism. The same system that was created 500 years ago of the banking system was used on us for oppression. We are coming out of that. We have agreed on the moratorium that we will be a new democratic dispensation. Then we find these banks who are saying, okay, fine, they are in a democracy. Let's dupe and actually fool their leaders by making sure that they have political power, which is useless without money. They control the banks on the one side, and the control of the banks, which means they control the flow of money. You can have political will as long as there's no money supporting that political will to do the development of infrastructure, to make sure that you pay people the value that they are worth. Income is a determination of what value of contribution you're giving. Yeah. So if they say we are not worth the income we should be earning, after being subjected to apartheid, we should be paid, Sifiso, for sitting and doing nothing actually. But we are not lazy people, we are builders, we are people, we are businessmen and everything. We're saying pay us equitably so that we can develop ourselves. And when we demand that, we find that the banks are not wanting to create the necessary liquidity in the economy, the necessary money flow, and they are making sure that we are all blocked at the gate of it. So the racism in the banks is systematic and it's intentional and has been designed by those that are controlling the banking licenses to keep the majority of black people out. And the minute we challenge this institution, you will see if the banks were to deregulate themselves around the process of how they are going to lend, the economy will mushroom instantly. They don't want to allow that.
Why is there then so much under-reporting, except of course for the Star newspaper that carried the story, and Twitter went ablaze.
Yeah.
You know, and people saying, "This is how I lost my house. This is how I lost my car." One woman in Meadowlands was saying she paid for a house for 19 years and she lost her job and owed them less than 1,000, and they took the house. What are the politics behind this? You're the majority leaders. In fact, on this panel, I'm the only one that's not a doctor or a professor, but here you are. What needs to be done?
What needs to be done is the will around our leaders to save the interest of the black child in this country. We have got our leaders that has been prioritizing those that funds them. That's why even the underreporting that we are talking about, it depends who funds you, then you'll do as that person wishes.
Yeah.
That is how it is. So if you are living in my house and I'm the one that is looking after that house, that owns that house, you'll do as I want you to do. So that's why we have seen even the media houses, they don't perform as they're supposed to perform to inform South Africans about what is happening. Unfortunately today, if you are a South African or an African in general, you are from the sort of the underprivileged side of things, because most of what you're supposed to know and hear is not told to you. You have to dig deep to understand the truth about what is happening in this country. It's not everything that is you hear and you see on TV that is a reality in this country. There are a lot of agendas that is being built behind those things that we see today. But the fact of the matter that what needs to happen in this country, Africans needs to come together. Once they manage to come together, and then they need then to maximize from their capability. Because at the present moment, this country is performing below its potential capability, because it's only the few that are participating. But if we can maximize in ensuring that we have got, we look at the potential of having a collective capability of individuals in this country, we can go far. So that is the second thing that we need to do. Firstly is that we need to unite ourselves, and then secondly is then we look at our collective vision about what needs to happen in this country, including economy, socially, and politically, so that we are able then to drive our own agendas. Because if we are sitting in the corner, there are people that are driving their own agendas about what is happening in this country.
So you're saying there's a capture in the media, that is in the same pond with banks, and there's a facilitation of one narrative. We're not hearing the truth.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that is not told out there, even though there are few that are telling us, but you'll find that in especially the media side of things, most of what we hear from the media is driven by certain agendas. As Africans, we need them to dig deep to understand what is not told, so that we can understand the
truth. I was going to put you on the spot and ask which media you're talking about, because I've got an interest thereof. But of course it's true. The Zondo Commission was housed at the Tiso Black Star House. So Constitutional Justice, Mr. Zondo, the Deputy Chief Justice, allowed it to happen, paid Tiso Black Star from the Sunday Times to host a judicial commission of inquiry there. In my view, that would be a conflict of interest there. But let's take a break. More views after this. I see all your comments on the screen. Continue sending your questions and comments. Let's take this conversation higher. Follow Dr. Sihle Sibiya and Intsiga Economic Movement on all its social platforms. Sihle Jele joins us after the break. Follow Professor Bibi Boitumelo Sunukwane from the University of South Africa. And Prince Adil Nchabeleng is here. Follow him on Twitter. Quite a trailblazer. My name is Sifiso Mahlangu. Come back after the break. We talk, are banks prejudice to black people? Don't touch that dial. We'll be back.
This is Nedbank in Klerksdorp at Flamewood. White people are going in and black people are staying outside. They only allowing the whites to go in before the blacks. If there's a white person on the line, they come fetch her or him to go inside.
Tech Talk brought to you by Tamani Technologies and Systems. Tamani Technologies and Systems takes leadership in fourth industrial revolution. The whole world is facing a transformation. The revolution will be developed into the following stages: digitization, cyber security, Internet of Things, managed services, document management, and business applications. We provide business transformation and ICT solutions with presence in 13 African countries and 2 European countries. We are your leading partner in integrated platform providers, innovation leaders, standalone products, and innovation pace setters. Tamani Technologies and Systems, delivering value across continents.
Yeah, welcome back. This is ripped straight out of the headline. I'm starting a story by the Star, Mr. Ayanda Mdluli. Very nice piece on banks in the Republic. It was in fact Mr. Adil Nchabeleng that started this, taking South African banks to the Equality Court. And the gentlemen are speaking for themselves. Of course, I hasten to mention that I've invited FNB, ABSA, Standard Bank and Capitec. And I extended this invitation for this panel discussion to the South African Reserve Bank. They haven't gotten back to me, but as they say in the news, the show must go on. Mr. Sifiso is here. He's formerly with FNB and now in the NGO space from an organization called Right to Justice. Babjele, welcome you.
Thank you very much for hosting me.
Yeah, I've been following your social media trends after that story broke, saying racist banks must fall, and you're mobilizing the public
most definitely
to march the public to block banks. Is that sustainable? Can you really, Babjele, tell people to not be using the banks because they don't support black people? Your gesture might be, of good intent after the argument of Mr. Nchabeleng, but is it really feasible?
Yes, it is. But remember that we must be the change that we want to see. So if banks are not called out for what they do, or for the injustices that they put upon our people, which are the black majority, then they will never change. If we don't tell them that change this, do this, they will never change. But I think the most important part also is from the governance sort of part of view. There is no political will from our leaders to change the system. Just recently in 2017, the ruling party resolved that they must nationalize the South African Reserve Bank. But you see each and every leader of theirs speaking in tongues and speaking against the very same resolution from the political party. So it tells you that there is no political will. Purely based on the mere fact that banks are too powerful and they are beneficiaries of the very same system individually, even though it doesn't benefit all South Africans.
Dr. Sifiso was saying banks are the beneficiaries of the colonial system.
Most definitely.
Professor Snukwane says it is because of colonization that banks have inherently become so powerful. And do we let that power continue untested? You're saying it's time for blacks and young blacks to be speaking out.
In actual fact, they are beneficiaries in every form that you can try and investigate. But even currently, there is COVID premiers and COVID people who are seen to be corrupt. Even banks benefited from that. They are the biggest beneficiaries. They benefit from apartheid. They benefit from blackouts of Eskom. They benefit even from a pandemic. That's how unethical these people are. If you can check from the 500 billion that was borrowed by the president and the Minister of Finance, they benefited 100 billion, which is 20% of the overall 500 billion. So,
can it be argued that that money was for work? It was necessary for occupational functionality.
They got it under that
auspices, yes.
But unfortunately, none of our people on the ground benefited from that. I know for one, a taxi owner who's a friend of mine, very close. He was frustrated during the level 5 lockdown where there was no business. And his main problem was with the mere fact that his transportation, which does business for him, the taxis, are going to be taken because they can't access relief from the bank. So it didn't benefit anyone on the ground. But obviously they got the money under the prescript that they are going to benefit people, which did not happen.
Okay, so you are at this point gathering organizations,
Most definitely.
Inziga, Right to Justice,
Yes.
democracy, unions to get together and do what?
And go firstly to the union buildings if possible, and also to the institution that runs the bank, which is South African Banking Association, because that's where all of these things, that institution, for example, is comprised of CEOs and senior managers from banks. So they are banks, they are players, and they referee themselves through this organization because they govern and regulate themselves. So all those things shows that these people act with impunity. Some of their former CEOs who have who have attest to having rigged the rand.
But she apologized, though.
No, but it doesn't.
But she apologized.
It doesn't take the crime away.
Yeah.
In actual fact,
in Russia, you don't manipulate the rand and then say sorry.
In any other country, even
and then
in
get
Africa,
appointed to the board of the PIC.
You will not do that in Botswana, even.
Yeah, you won't do that in Botswana.
You'll definitely not do that in Botswana. But here in South Africa, we say, here's a promotion. Please go and manage our pensions through PIC. And whenever we are hiring in an energy space at ESCOM, we want you to be part of the people who recruit or interview our candidates in the energy space, whereas you are a banker. So it's a promotion. We thank you for rigging the rand.
Okay, so Maria Ramos, you say rigs the rand and then she gets a
promotion. And he gets to work with the president in morning
walks. Okay,
yes.
all right. But that relationship is old. Snookan, they come they come way back. Trevor and Cyril can walk together.
They can walk together.
There's history there. But from what Jel is saying, that it's almost like a thank you or a type of promotion. After you apologize for such a thing, there were no repercussions really. When you look at the CR17 statements and you look at the persons who gave money to the president, that campaign was his, it was personal. It wasn't political party funding. CR stands for Cyril Ramaphosa. That money was his personal campaign. Many of those people, Maria Ramos, Sifiso Tabengwa, and many others, were then appointed to the boards of state-owned enterprises. Are we speaking to the bottom when the challenge is at the top, or should we rather look to vote differently? I think as a society, is the challenge therefore with the electorate?
Yes, I think it's correct what you are saying, but I think one of the things that we are underestimating, I think let me make a scenario of making a distinction between Jacob Zuma and Cyril Ramaphosa. Cyril, luckily because he was made to be what he is by whiteness. So whiteness created Cyril, taught him the rules of the game, to a point that all of us knows that colonization, apartheid, had its own rule structures that directly justified corruption, created rules for corruption, white corruption in a sense. That's what he managed to do. So he played within the game. But the difference between him is that Jacob Zuma wanted to play outside, using the same more or less mechanism, strategies, so on and so forth. But he was playing outside of whiteness. So there is penalty for wanting to move out of whiteness. And there are repercussions for wanting to do that. If you check exactly what has happened, they more or less is the same. But the difference is where are you playing the game. So I think we must want to understand that. But above that, I think we must also want to move away from the myth of wanting to create the myth of black capitalist. I think the ANC made a mistake, terrible mistake, by wanting to believe that by creating that myth of black capitalist, it will resolve the problems that we are facing as blacks in general. Forgetting that capitalism, you can, boil it down to banking. Banking, it's wide. I actually wanted to ask, perhaps sometimes we want something that does not exist, because putting blackness and banking in the same paragraph or sentence, sometimes we are even bringing problems onto ourselves, because those two things cannot coexist. Cannot coexist in as far as my argument will be motivated by a logic that the structure of banking itself, it's wide naturally. And that's why we'll always want to have white journalists, white business, black journalists, black business, qualifying everything by blackness, because we've realized that we do not fit. So we want to fit in. We do not have indirectly the capacity, the capability to want to create our own things. We always want to qualify white structures, white system, white creation for us to be able to fit. If we didn't want to do that, we should be having our own things by now, operating our own economy. BRICS was aimed at doing that. I don't know what happened to the vision of BRICS as an example.
Well, the IMF happened. Yeah. We know that part. The IMF and the World Bank happened.
Yes.
There could have been an alternative to the borrowing that happened.
Correct.
But our government went to what we call the Bretton Woods institutions, which have imperialist tendencies. And maybe this is a good point to make, Adil, that the World Bank and the IMF dictate policy. When you take money, you don't just do what you want. Yeah, there are very sincere or insincere policy machinations to whatever political situation that country's in. But I want to take this further, Adil, to say, what are you then saying to the young women in the township who's just lost their job at a retail shop, to the old lady in the factory, to the man who does the street work or cleans at the mine, or what is your word to those people who are the worst hit right now, because they've already been struggling, having to catch 2 taxis a day on increasing Eskom tariffs and so on and so forth. So black people are really the most hit now under COVID, and now under what you're saying, apartheid banking.
Look, with regards to the men on the street, there is no resolve except through enterprise. And why I'm coming back to enterprise, the government has no capacity right now except through its grant scheme to issue out payments to an ordinary person. So if you have lost your job, the only hope you have is to regain a job through a new enterprise or a recapitalized company that will get money to restart its operation and create business activities. So there is no hope for all of us. We are in a quagmire situation. We are in a real crisis. The economy has plunged, has collapsed. We are in a worse economic situation today than we were before. Millions, 4 million has already been registered unemployed. There are other millions that are now currently sitting with no income to go forward for the next month, for the next week, for the next day. So we're sitting with a time bomb. When we say the bank have a responsibility to come on the table and finance the rebuilding of our economy post and during COVID, we are serious about it, because Treasury released 200 billion. Minister Tito Mboweni on Thursday, during the cabinet meeting on Treasury, confirmed it to say the money that was said to be 500 billion has not all been stolen. Portion of it was stolen.
Not all of it.
Portion of it was stolen. But the 500 billion within that, 200 billion was released by Treasury into the banks to make sure that they provide guaranteed, national credit guaranteed scheme to all the businesses that are looking for financial support or even rescue. That money is sitting with the banks. The banks have accounted that they've only released 11.7 billion of that amount of 200 billion, right? Come down, secondly, South African Reserve Bank released 200 billion of liquidity requirements on the banks and reduced it, which means they were given a boost in terms of their liquidity levels, which means now they have more money in their coffers to can borrow. So it's 400 billion already. Of the 500 billion that is currently being unaccounted for. So we've got 400 billion sitting right now, floating within the ether of the economy and the system. In the banks refusing to fund black people, refusing to help black people who are currently going in financial distress. Assets being repossessed when the law said when we enter into a lockdown under the Disaster Management Act, nobody's property should be taken away from them in any form, whether it is your room you're renting, your house, your car, and all of these things. Yet, we know a lot of black people are losing assets and property, mainly professionals who could not pay. Some of them have lost their jobs. Houses are being repossessed, which means property is being acquired and reacquired. That property is going to be refinanced another way through the same cycles that the banks are doing. So they are creating more money for themselves, yet depriving those that they are supposed to be serving. So we are saying right now that the banks need to come to the table, or else let's force our government to withdraw the licenses from these banks. One condition. Second condition of it is, even if we're saying we're going to build brand new black banks, you will never have a bank in the next 5 years with the necessary capital float required to be able to bankroll the post-COVID scenario. So we mustn't dream about solutions. We must be realistic. The solution sits with the current license holders, that we must demand that they transform, that they provide money to the economy, that they fund black people indiscriminately, on favorable terms, with no conditions attached except to the fact that go and create value that can be passed on into the economy. That is what we need to be talking about. Houses must be bonded and be given new mortgages. Brand new business people, black professionals that are sitting with key projects that should be coming to life, should be given that opportunity, so that what we're talking about, which is economic growth and stimulation, happens. Not a few SIPs project, which is strategic infrastructure presidential projects that are given leverage. So we've got to go back to the basics.
Angela, a black bank is not because you put a black CEO. Therefore, you think it's a black bank. When we talk black people in banking and what black banks should be doing for black people in this country, it should not be a cosmetic reform. You know, you don't just add a little, nice few blacks in suits and then you say, oh no, but this is transformation. It needs to be at a policy and structural level. Is this the time for your NGOs to be getting together? Is this the time for civil society to finally have a collective voice, not to be politicized, over a faction of the ruling party or whatever? But is this the time for NGOs to get together to finally demand transformation in this sector?
And justice, yes. I think I will concur with the Prof. The Prof says we want to qualify white institutions as our own by trying to put in a black face. So you are excluded by SANEF, and then you want to create a black journalist, a house of journalists, so that you can qualify yourself to be a well-organized structure and be a face of SANEF. But I have no desire. SANEF itself is a white institution. So you get there as a black face, it consumes you. And as practical example also, on the very same issue, our brothers and sisters in a professional space are the biggest drivers of anti-transformation within the institutions, because they want to qualify themselves as and be recognized by their bosses. Has
that been your experience, having worked for
most definitely
the banking institution for many years?
Most definitely. The biggest oppressors are our brothers, because they want to please their bosses. But other than that, we need to unite. It's long overdue. We need to unite beyond political party T-shirts and lines as a black majority and speak in one voice. Because if we are united, institutions will be able to listen to us. For example, we all want land. But we seem to be wanting land in different forms. The EFF has its own way of wanting land. The ANC, nationalists, progressives within the ANC want it under their own terms. You've got your PLF, your PAC. Why can't we unite and say, Cyril Ramaphosa, we want land now? How Cyril Ramaphosa will see as an accounting officer the president of the country. So it is about time. It is about time that the masses of our people need to unite and speak in one voice, because even the divides within political party lines that do not assist us. In actual fact, it's benefit the elites.
When you were at FNB, and maybe they'll have to respond to this,
Yes.
post this interview, because this is not the last one. I think this conversation is bigger than this interview. What was your relation with the black customer? What are some of the things you saw in attempting to assist black clientele?
They struggle, and most of their struggles comes from us, the frontline staff. But it's not always about one denying services to the black customer. It's systematic. When you apply, for example, for a loan, we do all the nitty-gritties of applying for a loan. We capture your details, and then we submit it to the creditors. And the creditors, that's where the risk profiles, how much you qualify for, and all those things. That's where decisions are made. And it's always a strategic white man or white woman who's in charge of the department. At most, I've seen it in different departments. At most, the creditors are always white, and they are there for a reason, and they know what they must ask, what is there to deliver. So banks are anti-black. They are very racist, even to their own employees within the system that they've employed.
Professor Snukon, parting shot. Mr. Jelly raises concerns to say, at a policy level, at a structural level, at a clientele and a face level, the black person is always behind. A type of Biko expression. Black man, you're on your own.
Look, I think moving forward, just to add on what my brother said, it's very important that we become chaotic to the system. We will always say...
Even the professors are talking chaos now.
No,
you know bad.
They always say that...
This thing has reached soaring levels. Social media is in an uproar. The religious community is finally talking the economy. The academic community is finally talking. It's time.
There's this saying that says that even chaos has its own order called disorder. If one takes an example of on the issue of mortgage or owning of houses or property, most people will know and argue that it is the basic starting point of creating wealth, even generational wealth for your family. One such an example is that because black people do not qualify for loans, that's why one will support the issue of land grabs and land occupation by force. Because through that, it looks like a simple exercise, but indirectly it gives access of land and property for future prospects for black people. So I support fully to say black people must continue to occupy land, to have land grabs, thinking ahead on what it entails as a future economic or investment prospect. That is very important to do. But we should not only be chaotic in as far as land is concerned alone. We should look at different avenues where we can be chaotic in making sure that we advance the interest and investment of black people.
All right. Nchabelen, parting shot?
Look, the parting shot is, I think let's advise government. Treasury must stop advancing policy whereby they encourage the South African Reserve Bank to apply a policy of monetary restraining, which means they are actually encouraging the Reserve Bank to restrain the monetary money flow of the economy. On the other hand, Treasury needs to correct itself through its own physical constraints, making sure that the wastage that is happening is resolved, and that money that is saved can be passed on to proper infrastructure programs. On the issue of banks, the fact that we have one media on mainstream level blocking the discourse on all their channels, we must start speaking out to say SABC, ENCA, Newsroom, all of them have been silent. Why is the fact that we're talking a very serious issue, none of the producers at any of their stations are speaking about the issue of banking? We have been silenced, we have been completely made sure that we're muted as a discourse in the economy and the society. So we are going to make sure that this issue gets elevated. The fact that the presidency has not responded on the issue we have raised on banking, we've written to him before we even went to the media, before we even released our statement. We wrote to the presidency to say, here is the issue of racism within banks. Can you give us, as our state president, a response on what needs to be done? The only one who responded was Tito Mboweni on the Thursday, when he said it is true the banks are sitting with money. But all other institutions are refusing. Eliseja Khanyago comes on newspapers, starts defending a position which he does not even know how to define at an economic level, let alone monetary. The Reserve Bank exists to create the financial flow of money within the economy. So as South Africans, I support what the professor says. We must start being chaotic towards the state authorities, those who are in executive positions. Secondary to the economy, those who are license holders of particularly banks. We must go and do a run on these banks. One, demonstrate to the banks that if we are organized properly through civil society, we will have a day where we agree on that one day that we just do a demonstration of our march. We are all going to ATMs to go and withdraw our money. We are all going to take queues into the banks as a demonstration means to say we are demonstrating and we're showing our unhappiness. We're all going to banks and go and talk our issues of how we have been excluded. There is no way we're going to shut down the money flow of the economy unless there is a revolution. If we desire a revolution, it will come under the circumstances that are created. But what we have right now is we want the reform within the banking sector, the release of the funds that must be given to black people, and reparations that are due to us in the money that is sitting in the economy right now within the banking institution, that they have made themselves wealthy and filthy rich. These are people who are not without money, but they are excluding you and I from accessing that money. So we are going to be more radical, more chaotic, more expressed with clarity and facts. We are not outside the law, we are within the law, and we are within the ambient. But if they push us too far, we will go to the point whereby we will usher and release a revolution in this country that will collapse the systems that have kept all of these banks and the elite in South Africa, including the ruling and power elite, to collapse. And we will create a government that will serve all its people. So we have a choice. The banks can come to the table and serve our people and open up the coffers and provide the required liquidity and credit as well as money. And the Reserve Bank can support, and Treasury can make more guarantees available for money to flow into the economy. And that is the solution we have put on the table.
All right, and that was Mr. Adil Nchabeling, President of Transform RSA. Transform RSA, led by Adil, has taken the major banks of this country to the Equality Court. A move by the banks he had defined as apartheid-style machinations by the banks towards black people. We'll be keeping a close eye on that case in the Equality Court, and we'll report back to you. My name is Sifiso Mahlangu. Thank you for watching Ripped from the Headlines. Shout out to Ayanda Mdluli for an excellent story. We'll be following this one up. Thank you to all my guests, Mr. Siphesihle Jele, Professor Bibi Sunukwane from the University of South Africa, Dr. Sihle Sibiya, PhD from Inziga Economic Movement. Thank you for watching. Until we speak again, it's a good afternoon from me.